You have great ideas, but struggle to get people to listen and follow through on your vision. Every meeting feels like an uphill battle to get buy-in for even simple changes, while you watch less experienced managers command respect and inspire their teams to go above and beyond. I am Dale Carnegie, and I spent decades studying what makes some people naturally magnetic leaders while others, despite their competence, struggle to influence anyone. Through my research and personal experience training thousands of individuals, I discovered that the most powerful leadership happens not through force or position, but through the quiet mastery of human relations, the ability to connect with people on a level that makes them want to follow you anywhere. The principles I'll share will transform you from someone who manages tasks to someone who inspires hearts, using the same quiet influence techniques that have elevated ordinary people to extraordinary leadership. But first, like this video, subscribe for more timeless wisdom on human relations, and comment below where you're watching from. I want to know which corner of the world is ready to master the art of quiet leadership. I want to take you back to where it all began, poverty-stricken farm in Missouri, where I learned my first and most painful lesson about human relations. My father struggled to make ends meet, and I grew up watching him work himself to exhaustion, while battling the constant fear that we might lose everything. What I didn't realize then was that this environment was teaching me something crucial about people, that beneath every tough exterior, every gruff manner, every defensive attitude, there lives a human being desperate to be understood and valued. I was painfully shy as a young man. I remember sitting in the back of classrooms, my heart racing whenever a teacher looked in my direction. I was convinced that I had nothing valuable to contribute, that my thoughts and opinions didn't matter. The irony wasn't lost on me later here. I was destined to teach others how to connect with people, yet I couldn't even connect with my own classmates. My transformation began when I discovered debate in college. For the first time in my life, I had to stand up and argue for something I believed in. I was terrified, my hands shaking as I gripped the podium. But something magical happened. When I focused on my message rather than my fear, when I became genuinely passionate about convincing others of my point of view, I found my voice. More importantly, I discovered that people responded not to my words alone, but to the sincerity behind them. After college, I tried my hand at various careers, sales, writing, but nothing felt quite right. I was searching for something, though I couldn't name what it was. Then came the opportunity to teach public speaking at a YMCA in New York. I thought I was simply helping people overcome their fear of speaking in front of groups, but I quickly realized I was witnessing something much deeper. My students weren't just learning to speak, they were learning to connect. They were discovering that their stories mattered, that their experiences had value, that other people actually wanted to hear what they had to say. I watched shy accountants become confident presenters, timid housewives become powerful advocates for their causes, and frustrated employees become inspiring leaders in their organizations. But the real breakthrough came when I noticed that my most successful students weren't necessarily the most eloquent speakers. They were the ones who had learned to make others feel important, who showed genuine interest in their audience, who listened as much as they spoke. They understood something that took me years to fully grasp. Leadership isn't about commanding attention, it's about giving attention to others. This revelation changed everything for me. I began to study not just what made people effective speakers, but what made them effective human beings. I observed successful leaders in every field I could access, from business executives to political figures to community organizers. I discovered that the principles that made someone magnetic on stage were the same ones that made them influential in boardrooms, inspiring in their families, and beloved in their communities. The more I studied human nature, the more convinced I became that most people approach relationships and leadership completely backwards. They focus on what they want to get rather than what they can give. They try to impress rather than to understand. They speak when they should listen, criticize when they should encourage, and demand when they should inspire. My mission became clear: to help people discover the profound truth that real influence comes not from forcing others to serve your agenda, but from learning to serve theirs. Not from making yourself seem important, but from making others feel important. Not from being right, but from helping others be right whenever possible. This wasn't just a business philosophy for MIT. Became a way of life. I saw how these principles transformed not just careers, but marriages, friendships, and entire families. I witnessed the power of human relations to heal divisions, resolve conflicts, and create the kind of loyalty that no amount of money or authority could buy. The most important discovery of my entire career came through observing one of the most feared executives in New York. Charles Schwab was known for his iron fist and his ability to get results through sheer intimidation. Workers dreaded being called into his office, and his management meetings were exercises in public humiliation for anyone who fell short of expectations. I had the opportunity to study his organization closely, and what I found was fascinating. Yes, people followed his orders, but only when he was watching. The moment he left the room, productivity dropped, enthusiasm died, and employees spent more time complaining about him than focusing on their work. He was getting compliance, not commitment; obedience, not loyalty; fear-based results, not inspired performance. Then something remarkable happened. Schwab attended one of my courses and gradually began to implement the human relations principles I taught. Instead of criticizing mistakes, he began acknowledging effort. Instead of demanding immediate results, he started asking for opinions and suggestions. Instead of ruling through fear, he began leading through appreciation and encouragement. The transformation was extraordinary. The same employees who had once avoided him began seeking him out with ideas and solutions. Teams that had been demoralized under his old approach became some of the most productive in the company. The man who had once ruled through intimidation became one of the most beloved leaders in his industry, and his results improved dramatically. This experience taught me the fundamental flaw in most people's approach to leadership and influence. We assume that because we can force someone to do something, we have led them effectively. But force creates resentment, not respect. Pressure generates resistance, not enthusiasm. Commands produce minimal compliance, not maximum effort. I realized that human beings are not machines that respond predictably to pressure and commands. We are emotional creatures driven by feelings, desires, and psychological needs that run far deeper than any organizational chart or job description. When you try to influence someone through force, you're fighting against their fundamental human nature. When you learn to influence through human relations, you're working with that nature. The difference became crystal clear to me through countless observations. Authoritarian leaders spend their days fighting battles, arguing with employees, defending their decisions, forcing compliance, dealing with resentment and resistance. They achieve their goals through exhaustion and attrition, burning through relationships and burning out themselves. Quiet leaders, on the other hand, seem to effortlessly inspire cooperation. They don't have to fight for respect, it's freely given. They don't have to demand loyalty, it naturally develops. They don't have to force results, people want to deliver their best work. The secret isn't that they're naturally charismatic or inherently powerful. The secret is that they understand how human beings actually work. I discovered that every person carries within them a deep, often unconscious set of emotional needs. The need to feel important, the need to be appreciated, the need to be understood, the need to contribute something meaningful, the need to have their opinions valued. When you learn to recognize and fulfill these needs in others, you tap into a source of motivation and loyalty that no amount of authority or intimidation can match. But here's what most people miss. You can't fake this. You can't manipulate people into feeling valued if you don't genuinely value them. You can't pretend to be interested in their ideas if you're really just looking for ways to use them. People have an uncanny ability to sense authenticity. The lack of it, the leaders who master human relations aren't employing techniques or tricks. They're developing a fundamental shift in perspective. Instead of seeing people as obstacles to overcome or resources to exploit, they begin to see them as unique individuals with their own dreams, fears, talents, and contributions. Instead of asking, how can I get this person to do what I want? They start asking, how can I help this person achieve what they want while accomplishing our shared goals? This isn't soft leadership. It's smart leadership. It's not about being nice to people. It's about being effective with people. Some of the most successful leaders I've studied have been demanding, ambitious, and relentlessly focused on results. But they achieved those results by understanding that the fastest way to get what you want is to help others get what they want. I learned that criticism, no matter how constructive you think it is, puts people on the defensive. It makes them want to justify their actions rather than improve them. It focuses their attention on protecting their ego rather than solving the problem. Even when criticism is completely accurate, it often produces the opposite of what you're trying to achieve. On the other hand, when you approach people with understanding, appreciation, and genuine interest in their perspective, something magical happens. Their defenses come down. They become willing to examine their own behavior and consider new approaches. They start looking for ways to improve rather than ways to defend themselves. This was my great discovery. The quiet leaders of the world have learned to work with human nature, not against it. They've discovered that influence isn't about overpowering others, it's about empowering them. If I had to choose just one principle that could transform anyone into a more effective leader, it would be this: become genuinely interested in other people, not for what they can do for you, not for how they can advance your agenda, but for who they are as human beings with their own hopes, dreams, challenges, and victories. I learned this lesson in the most unexpected way through watching my dog, Tippy. Every morning when I came downstairs, Tippy would greet me with such genuine enthusiasm that it was impossible not to smile. His tail would wag furiously, his whole body would wiggle with excitement, and for those few moments, I felt like the most important person in the world. Tippy wasn't trying to get something from me. He was simply expressing pure, authentic joy at seeing me. That's when it hit me. Most people go through their entire lives without anyone showing them that level of genuine interest and enthusiasm. We're so focused on our own concerns, our own problems, our own goals, that we barely notice the people around us as anything more than supporting characters in our personal drama. I began to experiment with this principle in my daily interactions. Instead of rushing through conversations thinking about what I needed to say next, I started really listening to what people were telling me. Instead of looking for opportunities to share my own experiences, I began asking questions about theirs. Instead of trying to impress people with my knowledge or accomplishments, I focused on learning about their knowledge and accomplishments. The results were immediate and profound. People who had previously seemed uninterested in conversation suddenly became animated and engaged. Colleagues who had been merely polite began sharing their real thoughts and concerns. Even strangers responded with warmth and openness that surprised both of us. I remember one particular conversation with a janitor at the building where I taught. For months, we had exchanged polite nods in the hallway. Then one day, instead of just saying hello, I stopped and asked him about his work. "This must be a challenging job," I said. "What's the most difficult part of keeping a building this size clean?" His face lit up. For the next 20 minutes, he told me about the different types of cleaning challenges each floor presented, the techniques he'd developed for handling various problems, and his pride in maintaining such a professional environment. He explained how he scheduled his work to minimize disruptions, how he'd learned to identify potential maintenance issues before they became serious problems, and how much satisfaction he took in his contribution to the building's operation. As I listened, I realized I was talking to an expert, someone who had developed real expertise and took genuine pride in his craft. But more importantly, I was talking to a human being who rarely had anyone show interest in his work or acknowledge his knowledge and skill. From that day forward, our relationship was completely different. He would go out of his way to keep my classroom area spotless. He would alert me to any building issues that might affect my classes. He became, in essence, a partner in helping me succeed, not because I had asked him to, but because I had shown genuine interest in helping him feel valued and appreciated. This experience taught me something crucial about human nature. Everyone is an expert at something. Everyone has knowledge, experience, and insights that could benefit others. Everyone has struggled with challenges and achieved victories that have meaning and value. But most people rarely have anyone show genuine interest in these aspects of their lives. When you become genuinely interested in others, you're not just employing a leadership technique, you're fulfilling a basic human need. You're giving people something they crave but rarely receive, the experience of being truly seen and valued for who they are, not just for what they can do for you. But here's the critical point. This interest must be authentic. People can sense insincerity from a mile away. If you're asking questions just to manipulate someone or get something from them, they'll feel it. If you're showing interest only when you need a favor, they'll know it. Genuine interest comes from a fundamental shift in perspective, from being focused primarily on yourself to being curious about the rich inner lives of the people around you. I developed several practices that helped me cultivate this genuine interest. I began assuming that every person I met had something valuable to teach me. I started looking for the unique perspective that each individual brought to any situation. I practiced asking questions not to gather information for my own purposes, but simply to learn more about how others see and experience the world. The transformation in my relationships was remarkable. People began seeking me out for conversations. They shared their problems and asked for advice. They offered help and support without being asked. They became invested in my success because they felt I was invested in theirs. This principle became the foundation of everything else I would learn about human relations and quiet leadership. Because when people know you're genuinely interested in them as individuals, they become open to your influence in ways that no amount of authority or persuasion could achieve. They trust you because they feel valued by you. They listen to you because they know you listen to them. They want to help you succeed because they believe you want them to succeed. Asterisk, asterisk. Deep within every human being lies a hunger so powerful it drives nearly every action we take. Yet most people go through life with this hunger barely acknowledged, much less satisfied. It's the hunger to feel important, to know that our lives matter, that our contributions have value, that our existence makes a difference in the world. I discovered the transformative power of fulfilling this hunger through a simple interaction. That changed both my understanding of human nature and the trajectory of my career. I was teaching at the YMCA when I noticed that one of my students, a quiet bookkeeper named Harold, rarely participated in discussions despite obvious intelligence and insight. After class one evening, instead of rushing home, I approached Harold with genuine curiosity about his perspective on the lesson. "Harold," I said, "I noticed you seemed thoughtful during tonight's discussion about handling difficult conversations. In your work, you must encounter challenging situations with clients and colleagues. What's been your experience? What happened?" Next was extraordinary. Harold's entire demeanor changed. His shoulders straightened, his eyes lit up, and for the next 30 minutes, he shared insights about human behavior that were more practical and profound than anything I had taught that evening. He described techniques he'd developed for handling angry customers, strategies for maintaining composure under pressure, and observations about what motivates different types of people. As I listened, I realized I was hearing from someone who had developed genuine expertise through years of real-world experience. But more importantly, I was witnessing the transformation that occurs when someone feels truly valued and important. Harold wasn't just sharing information, he was sharing a piece of himself that he rarely had the opportunity to express. From that night forward, Harold became one of my most engaged students. But the change went far beyond the classroom. Weeks later, he told me that our conversation had given him the confidence to speak up in meetings at work, to offer suggestions to his supervisor, and to take on leadership responsibilities he'd previously avoided. By making him feel important in one small interaction, I had unlocked potential that had been dormant for years. This experience taught me that the desire to feel important isn't vanity or ego, it's a fundamental human need, as basic as hunger or thirst. When this need is fulfilled, people flourish. When it's ignored or denied, they wither. The quiet leaders I began studying had all mastered the art of making others feel genuinely important, and this skill was the foundation of their influence. But here's what separates true leaders from mere manipulators: the difference between making someone feel important and making them feel flattered. Flattery is insincere praise, designed to get something from someone. Making someone feel important is recognizing and acknowledging the genuine value they bring to any situation. I learned to look for the real contributions people make, the small acts of excellence that usually go unnoticed, the extra effort that makes a difference, the unique perspective that adds value to discussions, the reliability that others depend on. When you acknowledge these authentic contributions, you're not flattering someone, you're helping them see their own worth more clearly. One of my students, a department manager named Margaret, shared a story that perfectly illustrates this principle. She had been struggling with a chronically late employee who seemed indifferent to company policies and resistant to feedback. Previous managers had tried criticism, warnings, and ultimatums, all without success. Margaret decided to try a different approach. Instead of focusing on the employee's lateness, she began noticing and acknowledging the things he did well. She commented on his thoroughness when completing projects. She praised his ability to solve complex problems that frustrated other team members. She asked for his input on process improvements, recognizing his practical insights. Within a month, the chronic lateness problem had virtually disappeared. But more importantly, this employee had transformed from a reluctant participant into an engaged team member who actively looked for ways to contribute. By making him feel important and valued for his real strengths, Margaret had tapped into his natural desire to live up to that positive image. The key to making others feel important is to focus on their strengths, contributions, and potential rather than their weaknesses and shortcomings. This doesn't mean ignoring problems or avoiding difficult conversations. It means approaching those conversations from a foundation of respect and appreciation rather than criticism and judgment. I developed several practices that helped me consistently make others feel important. I began looking for opportunities to ask people for their advice and opinions, recognizing that being asked for input is one of the most powerful ways to feel valued. I started acknowledging specific contributions rather than offering generic praise. Instead of saying "good job," I would say "your attention to detail in that report helped us avoid a significant problem." I learned to express genuine appreciation for the unique value each person brought to our shared endeavors. I made it a habit to tell people not just what they did well, but why it mattered, how their contribution affected the outcome, helped the team, or made a difference to others. The results were consistently remarkable. People who felt important in their interactions with me became more creative, more engaged, more willing to take initiative, and more loyal to our shared goals. They began to see themselves differently, not as replaceable cogs in a machine, but as valuable contributors to something meaningful. This principle became one of the cornerstones of my approach to leadership and human relations. Because when you make others feel important, you don't just change how they feel about themselves, you change how they feel about you, about their work, and about what's possible in their lives. Asterisk, there is no sound in any language more beautiful to a person than the sound of their own name. This simple truth revolutionized my understanding of human relations and became one of the most practical tools in my arsenal for building instant rapport and lasting influence. I learned this lesson through embarrassment. Early in my teaching career, I prided myself on being able to deliver compelling lectures and provide valuable insights to my students. But I noticed that despite my best efforts, I wasn't connecting with people the way I wanted to. Conversations felt formal and distant. Students were polite, but not engaged. Something was missing, but I couldn't identify what. The revelation came during a chance encounter with Jim Farley, who was known for his remarkable ability to remember names and faces. I watched him work a room of 200 people, calling each person by name, asking about their families, remembering details from previous conversations. The effect was magnetic. People lit up when he approached. They leaned in when he spoke. They seemed genuinely delighted to be in his presence. Curious about his technique, I asked Jim for his secret. "Dale," he said, "I make it my business to learn the name of every person I meet, and I make sure to use it. A person's name is the most important word in the world to them. When you use it, you're giving them a gift, the gift of recognition, of being seen as an individual rather than just another face in the crowd." I decided to put this principle to the test. I began making a conscious effort to learn and use names in every interaction. At first it felt awkward and forced. I would repeat names back when introduced, ask for spelling when necessary, and find natural ways to use names throughout conversations. But the results were immediate and undeniable. Students who had been distant suddenly became warm and engaged. Business contacts who had been merely professional became genuinely friendly. Even brief interactions with service workers became more pleasant and productive when I took the time to learn and use their names. I remember one particular experience with a hotel desk clerk named Robert. Most guests treated him as an invisible function, someone to check them in and provide room keys. But I made it a point to learn his name and use it throughout our interaction. "Thank you, Robert. I appreciate your help with this, Robert. Have a wonderful evening, Robert." The transformation was remarkable. Robert's entire demeanor changed. He became animated and helpful in ways that went far beyond his job requirements. He provided recommendations for restaurants, arranged for early check-in on my next visit, and even called my room to ensure everything was satisfactory. By the simple act of using his name, I had transformed a routine transaction into a genuine human connection. This experience taught me that using someone's name is more than just good manners. It's a powerful acknowledgement of their individual worth. In a world where people often feel anonymous and overlooked, hearing your own name spoken with respect and attention is profoundly affirming. I developed several techniques for mastering names. When meeting someone new, I would repeat their name immediately. "Nice to meet you, Susan." I would ask about the spelling or origin, if there was any uniqueness to the name. I would use the name naturally throughout our conversation, being careful not to overdo it, but ensuring I said it several times. For larger groups, I would write names down as soon as possible after introductions, along with a brief note about the person to help cement the association in my memory. I practiced visualizing the written name when looking at the person, creating multiple pathways for recall. But the real breakthrough came when I realized that remembering names wasn't just about memory techniques, it was about caring enough to make the effort. When you truly value someone as an individual, remembering their name becomes a priority rather than a burden. The business applications were extraordinary. Clients felt more valued and were more likely to work with me long term. Team members felt more connected and performed better. Even difficult personalities became more cooperative when I consistently used their names with respect and appreciation. I learned that names carry emotional weight beyond their practical function. They represent identity, heritage, family connections, and personal history. When you use someone's name correctly and respectfully, you're honoring all of these dimensions of their being. The quiet leaders I studied had all mastered this principle. They understood that in an increasingly impersonal world, the simple act of remembering and using names created instant differentiation. They stood out not because they were more intelligent or charismatic, but because they made others feel recognized and valued at the most basic level. Asterisk. If I could give every aspiring leader just one skill that would transform their effectiveness overnight, it would be the ability to truly listen. Not the kind of surface-level hearing that most people mistake for listening, but the deep, focused attention that makes others feel understood and valued at their core. I discovered the power of listening through one of the most humbling experiences of my early career. I had been invited to speak at a business dinner, and I was eager to impress the audience with my knowledge and insights. I prepared extensively, crafting what I thought were brilliant observations about leadership and success. But when I arrived at the event, I found myself seated next to an elderly gentleman named Samuel, who had built one of the most successful manufacturing companies in the region. Instead of waiting for my opportunity to speak, I decided to ask him about his business. What started as polite conversation turned into a 3-hour masterclass in business strategy, human psychology, and practical wisdom. Samuel shared stories about navigating economic downturns, building employee loyalty, dealing with difficult customers, and making crucial decisions under pressure. His insights were more valuable than anything I had planned to say that evening. But here's what struck me most. Throughout our entire conversation, I barely spoke. I simply listened, asked thoughtful questions, and showed genuine interest in his experiences. At the end of the evening, Samuel shook my hand warmly and said, "Dale, that was one of the most stimulating conversations I've had in years. You're a brilliant conversationalist." I had to smile at the irony was being praised for my conversation skills when I had done almost nothing but listen. This experience taught me a profound truth about human nature. Most people are so hungry to be heard and understood that they will perceive anyone who truly listens to them as wise, interesting, and valuable. In a world where everyone is waiting for their turn to speak, the person who focuses entirely on understanding others becomes magnetic. I began to study the difference between hearing and listening. Hearing is passive sound waves hitting your eardrums. Listening is active engaging your full attention to understand not just the words being spoken, but the emotions, concerns, and meanings behind those words. Most people listen with the intent to reply rather than the intent to understand. They're mentally composing their response while the other person is still speaking. They're looking for openings to share their own stories, opinions, or advice. They're judging, evaluating, and preparing arguments rather than simply receiving and understanding. True listening requires suspending your own agenda and focusing entirely on the other person's experience. It means asking clarifying questions, not to gather ammunition for your point of view, but to genuinely understand theirs. It means reflecting back what you've heard to ensure accuracy. It means paying attention to tone, body language, and emotional undertones as much as actual words. I developed what I called the listening discipline. When someone was speaking to me, I would make a conscious effort to quiet my internal dialogue and focus completely on understanding their perspective. I would ask myself, what is this person really trying to tell me? What emotions are they experiencing? What do they need from this conversation? The results were extraordinary. People began seeking me out for important conversations. They shared their deepest concerns and biggest dreams. They asked for advice and genuinely considered my suggestions. They felt safe being vulnerable and authentic in my presence. I remember a particular conversation with a factory supervisor named Tom, who was struggling with what he described as troublemaker employees. He came to me frustrated and angry, ready to demand that his boss fire several workers who were disrupting productivity and morale. Instead of offering immediate solutions, I simply listened. For over an hour, Tom shared his frustrations, his attempts to solve the problems, and his feelings of helplessness. As he talked, I began to hear something beneath his anger: exhaustion, disappointment, and a genuine care for his team that was being overshadowed by his frustration. Through careful questions and patient listening, I learned that these troublemaker employees were actually skilled workers who felt unheard and undervalued. They weren't trying to cause problems, they were trying to communicate concerns about safety issues, process inefficiencies, and resource shortages that were affecting their ability to do quality work. By the end of our conversation, Tom had talked himself into a completely different approach. Instead of demanding firings, he decided to hold individual meetings with each employee to understand their concerns. The result was not only improved morale and productivity, but the implementation of several valuable suggestions that saved the company both time and money. This experience reinforced my understanding that listening is often more powerful than speaking. When you give people the space to fully express themselves, they often discover their own solutions. When you understand the real issues beneath surface complaints, you can address root causes rather than symptoms. I learned that there are different levels of listening. Surface listening focuses only on words and facts. Emotional listening picks up on feelings and underlying concerns. Empathetic listening seeks to understand the other person's experience from their perspective. Strategic listening looks for opportunities to help and add value. The quiet leaders I studied had mastered all levels of listening and knew when to employ each one. They understood that listening wasn't a passive activity, was an active investment in relationships that paid dividends in trust, loyalty, and influence. Most importantly, I discovered that when you become known as someone who truly listens, people will tell you things they won't tell anyone else. You become privy to information, insights, and opportunities that others miss. You develop a reputation as someone who cares about others, which makes others care about you and your success. The fastest way to connect with another human being is to get them talking about their favorite subject themselves. This isn't because people are selfish or narcissistic, but because each person's life experience is the most interesting and important story they know. When you show genuine curiosity about that story, you create an instant bond that transcends all other differences. I stumbled upon this principle during a dinner party where I found myself seated next to a renowned botanist. I knew nothing about plants or scientific research, and I was initially intimidated by his impressive credentials and obvious expertise. But instead of trying to impress him with my own accomplishments, I simply asked him how he became interested in botany. What followed was one of the most fascinating conversations of my life. For 2 hours, this distinguished scientist shared stories about his childhood fascination with wildflowers, his adventures collecting specimens in remote locations, his breakthrough discoveries that had advanced botanical science, and his passion for understanding the intricate relationships between plants and their environments. I barely said a word beyond asking occasional questions to encourage him to continue. Yet, at the end of the evening, he told mutual friends that I was one of the most interesting people he'd ever met. Once again, I was being credited with conversational brilliance when my only skill had been knowing how to encourage someone else to share their passion. This experience revealed a fundamental truth about human psychology. People feel most connected to those who show genuine interest in their experiences, thoughts, and feelings. When you ask thoughtful questions about someone's life, work, or interests, you're giving them a precious gift, the opportunity to feel heard, understood, and valued. But there's an art to encouraging others to share themselves authentically. It's not enough to simply ask questions. You must ask the right questions in the right way with genuine curiosity and respect. Generic questions like "How are you?" or "What do you do?" rarely lead to meaningful connection, but specific, thoughtful questions that show you're paying attention can open doors to rich conversation and deep understanding. I developed what I called the curiosity method. Instead of focusing on what I wanted to share or what I could gain from a conversation, I would approach each interaction with genuine wonder about the other person's unique perspective and experience. I would ask myself, what can I learn from this person? What interesting stories might they have? What challenges have they overcome? What achievements are they proud of? This shift in mindset transformed every interaction. A conversation with a taxi driver became an exploration of city changes he'd witnessed over decades of driving. A chat with a store clerk revealed insights about customer behavior and retail challenges. Even brief encounters with maintenance workers or security guards became opportunities to learn about their expertise and experiences. I learned to ask follow-up questions that showed I was truly listening and interested in understanding more. Instead of simply nodding and moving on, I would say things like, "That sounds challenging. How did you handle it?" Or, "I've never thought about it that way. Can you tell me more?" Or, "What was that experience like for you?" One of my most memorable applications of this principle involved a business owner named Frank, who was known for being difficult and disagreeable. Other people avoided him because conversations with Frank often turned into arguments or complaints. But I decided to try a different approach. Instead of discussing business matters, I asked Frank about his hobby of restoring vintage automobiles. His entire demeanor changed as he described the satisfaction of bringing a rusted Hulk back to pristine condition. He shared the history of different car models, the techniques he'd learned for metalwork and painting, and the joy of driving a perfectly restored classic car. As Frank talked about his passion, I saw a completely different person, who was patient, meticulous, creative, and deeply knowledgeable. The difficult businessman was actually a skilled craftsman with an artistic soul and a generous desire to share his expertise with anyone who showed genuine interest. From that day forward, Frank and I had a completely different relationship. He became not only cooperative in business dealings, but actively helpful, offering advice and resources that benefited my work. By encouraging him to talk about something he loved, I had discovered the person behind the defensive exterior. This principle proved invaluable in all areas of life. With employees, I learned to ask about their career goals, their proudest accomplishments, and their ideas for improvement. With clients, I inquired about their business challenges, their industry insights, and their vision for the future. With family and friends, I explored their dreams, their concerns, and their daily experiences. The key was learning to ask questions that went beyond surface level. Instead of "How's work?" I would ask, "What's the most interesting project you're working on?" Instead of "How's your family?" I might ask, "What's your daughter enjoying most about school this year?" Instead of generic pleasantries, I learned to ask questions that invited real sharing. I discovered that when people feel encouraged to talk about themselves in a respectful, interested environment, they reveal their best qualities. They share their knowledge, their passions, their hopes, and their insights. They become more animated, more creative, and more generous. They start to see you as someone who truly cares about them as individuals. Most importantly, I learned that encouraging others to talk about themselves isn't just a technique for building rapport. It's a genuine pathway to understanding and appreciating the remarkable complexity and uniqueness of every human being you encounter. One of the most powerful discoveries in my study of human relations was this: every person you meet, no matter how different they seem on the surface, shares fundamental hopes, fears, and desires with you. Learning to identify and connect through this common ground became the bridge that allowed me to influence and inspire people from all walks of life. I learned this lesson through a challenging situation early in my career. I had been asked to help resolve a bitter dispute between a factory owner and his workers who were threatening to strike. The two sides seemed irreconcilably opposed: management, focused on profits and efficiency; workers concerned with fair wages and working conditions. Everyone expected the negotiation to be a battle, but instead of immediately diving into the points of disagreement, I spent time talking separately with representatives from both sides. I asked each group not about their demands, but about their underlying concerns and goals. What I discovered surprised everyone, including myself. The factory owner, whom the workers saw as greedy and uncaring, was actually deeply worried about keeping the company viable so he could continue providing jobs for the community. He had grown up in poverty and was driven by a genuine desire to create stable employment for others. The workers, whom management saw as ungrateful and unreasonable, were primarily concerned about being able to provide security for their families and maintain their dignity as skilled craftsmen. When I brought both sides together, instead of starting with their differences, I began by highlighting what they shared: a commitment to the company's success, pride in producing quality products, and concern for the long-term stability of everyone involved. Once we established this common ground, the specific disagreements became problems to solve together rather than battles to win. The negotiation, which everyone expected to take weeks, was resolved in 2 days. More importantly, the relationship between management and workers was permanently improved because they had discovered they were allies working toward shared goals rather than enemies competing for limited resources. This experience taught me that most conflicts arise not from truly incompatible interests, but from focusing on differences while ignoring commonalities. When you learn to identify shared values, concerns, and goals, you create a foundation for cooperation that makes even difficult conversations more productive. I began applying this principle in every challenging interaction. When dealing with difficult customers, I would look for shared concerns about quality, service, or value. When working with resistant employees, I would identify common interests in success, recognition, or professional growth. When addressing conflicts between team members, I would help them discover their mutual investment in achieving excellent results. The technique became particularly powerful in sales and persuasion situations. Instead of trying to convince people to accept my point of view, I would first understand their perspective and identify areas where our interests aligned. This created a collaborative atmosphere where we were working together toward mutual benefit rather than fighting over opposing positions. I remember working with a potential client named Richard, who initially seemed completely uninterested in my training programs. He was skeptical about their value and resistant to spending money on what he called soft skills development. Rather than argue with his objections, I asked him about his biggest business challenges. As Richard talked, I discovered that his primary concern was developing his management team to handle increased responsibility as the company grew. He was frustrated by his inability to delegate effectively because he didn't trust his managers to maintain the standards he had established. He worried about losing the personal touch that had made his business successful. I realized that despite his skepticism about soft skills, Richard and I shared the same fundamental goal, developing people who could maintain excellence while taking on greater responsibility. Once I framed my training programs in terms of this shared objective, showing how improved communication and leadership skills would enable his managers to uphold his standards, his resistance disappeared entirely. The key to finding common ground is learning to look beneath surface positions to underlying interests and values. People may disagree about methods, but they often share similar goals. They may have different priorities, but they usually want many of the same basic things: success, security, recognition, growth, and meaningful contribution. I developed several techniques for identifying and building on common ground. I learned to ask questions like, what would success look like to you in this situation? Or what's most important to you about this decision? These questions revealed underlying values and concerns that often aligned more than initial positions suggested. I also learned to listen for shared experiences, challenges, or aspirations. When someone mentioned struggling with time management, I would share my own challenges in that area. When they talked about wanting to provide better opportunities for their children, I would connect that to my own family concerns. These personal connections created bonds that transcended professional or business relationships. Perhaps most importantly, I discovered that acknowledging common ground doesn't require agreeing with everything someone says. You can disagree with someone's methods while agreeing with their goals. You can have different priorities while sharing fundamental values. You can take different approaches while working toward compatible outcomes. This principle transformed my ability to work with difficult personalities, resolve conflicts, and build coalitions around shared objectives. It taught me that influence isn't about overpowering opposition, but about finding the threads of connection that allow people to work together. Despite their differences, the quiet leaders I studied had all mastered this art of finding common ground. They understood that lasting influence comes not from defeating others, but from helping them see how cooperation serves everyone's interests better than conflict. Nothing destroys relationships and undermines influence faster than argumentative confrontation, yet most people handle disagreement in exactly this destructive way. Learning to disagree without being disagreeable became one of my most valuable skills for maintaining relationships. While still standing firm on important principles, I learned this lesson the hard way through a public embarrassment that taught me more about human psychology than years of study. During a lecture I was attending, the speaker made what I knew to be a factual error about a historical date. Eager to show my knowledge and correct the mistake, I interrupted to point out the error in front of the entire audience. Technically, I was right. I had the facts on my side. But the result was disastrous. The speaker became defensive and argumentative. The audience felt uncomfortable watching the public correction. The positive atmosphere of the event was destroyed. Even though I was factually correct, I had accomplished nothing except damaging relationships and creating antagonism. That experience taught me a crucial truth. You can win an argument and lose a relationship. You can be right about the facts and wrong about the approach. You can prove your point and undermine your influence. The goal isn't to be right, it's to be effective. I began studying how skilled diplomats, successful negotiators, and respected leaders handled disagreement. What I discovered was a completely different approach that preserved relationships while still addressing important differences. They had learned to disagree with ideas while respecting the people who held those ideas. The foundation of this approach is understanding that attacking someone's opinion often feels like attacking them personally. When you tell someone they're wrong, you're not just challenging their facts, you're challenging their judgment, their intelligence, and their credibility. This naturally triggers defensive reactions that make productive conversation impossible. Developed what I called the respectful disagreement method. Instead of saying, "You're wrong," or "That's not correct," I learned to say things like I see it differently, or my experience has been somewhat different, or I wonder if there might be another way to look at this. These phrases disagreed with the position without attacking the person. Even more powerful was learning to find elements of truth in opposing viewpoints before introducing my own perspective. I would say things like, "You make an excellent point about the importance of efficiency, and I agree that should be a priority. I wonder if we might also consider the impact on employee morale as we implement these changes." This approach acknowledged the validity of their concerns while introducing additional factors to consider. It created a collaborative atmosphere where we were building on each other's ideas rather than tearing them down. I remember a particularly challenging situation with a business partner named William, who had developed a marketing strategy I believed would be ineffective and potentially damaging to our reputation. My first instinct was to explain why his approach was wrong and present my alternative. But I had learned that direct opposition would likely make him defensive and resistant to change. Instead, I began by acknowledging the strengths of his strategy. "William, I can see you've put a lot of thought into reaching our target market, and I appreciate your focus on aggressive growth. You're absolutely right that we need to increase our visibility." Then I introduced my concerns as questions rather than criticisms. "I'm wondering how our current customers might react to this approach. What do you think would happen if we tested a smaller version first?" This approach allowed William to maintain his dignity while considering alternative perspectives. Instead of defending his original plan, he began examining it more critically. We ended up developing a hybrid strategy that incorporated the best elements of both approaches, something that never would have happened if I had started with confrontation. I learned that there are several key principles for disagreeing without being disagreeable. First, always show respect for the other person's right to hold their opinion, even if you disagree with it. Second, focus on understanding their reasoning before presenting your own. Third, look for partial agreements or areas where you can find common ground. Fourth, present your disagreement as an additional perspective rather than a replacement for theirs. Perhaps most importantly, I discovered that timing matters enormously in disagreement. Challenging someone's ideas immediately after they present them often triggers defensiveness. But if you first acknowledge their contribution, ask questions to understand their reasoning, and then introduce your perspective as building on their foundation, people become much more open to alternative viewpoints. I also learned to choose my battles carefully. Not every disagreement needs to be voiced. Before speaking up, I would ask myself, is this important enough to risk the relationship? Will changing their mind on this issue actually matter? Am I disagreeing because it's truly important, or just because I want to be right? This principle transformed my ability to work with difficult personalities and navigate complex organizational politics. I could maintain my integrity and advocate for my beliefs without creating enemies or burning bridges. I could influence outcomes while preserving relationships. The quiet leaders I studied had all mastered this gentle art of disagreement. They understood that lasting influence comes not from winning arguments, but from maintaining the respect and trust that allows for ongoing dialogue and collaboration. They knew that how you disagree is often more important than what you disagree about. One of the most counterintuitive discoveries in my study of human relations was this: admitting when you're wrong, far from undermining your authority, actually strengthens your credibility and influence. Yet most people fight this principle because they believe that acknowledging mistakes makes them appear weak or incompetent. I learned this lesson through a mistake that could have destroyed an important business relationship. I had scheduled a training session for a company's management team, and in my enthusiasm to impress them with cutting-edge techniques, I recommended a new approach to employee motivation that I had read about but never personally tested. The managers implemented my suggestion with disastrous results. Employee morale plummeted, productivity decreased, and several valuable team members threatened to quit. The company president called me into his office, and I knew I was facing not only the loss of a significant client, but potential damage to my reputation that could affect future business. My first instinct was to defend myself, to explain that the technique had worked for other companies, that implementation must have been flawed, that external factors might have contributed to the problems. But as I sat across from this obviously frustrated executive, I realized that defensiveness would only make things worse. Instead, I took a deep breath and said, "You're absolutely right to be upset. I made a serious error in judgment. I recommended something I hadn't thoroughly tested, and that was irresponsible of me. The problems your company is experiencing are my fault, and I take full responsibility." The effect was immediate and surprising. The president's anger visibly diminished. His defensive posture relaxed. Instead of attacking me further, he began asking questions about how we could fix the situation. By admitting my mistake quickly and completely, I had transformed a confrontational encounter into a collaborative problem-solving session. We worked together to develop a recovery plan that not only restored employee morale, but actually improved it beyond previous levels. The president became one of my strongest advocates, often telling other business leaders, "Dale Carnegie is someone you can trust because when he makes a mistake, he admits it and fixes it." This experience taught me that people expect perfection from others about as much as they expect it from themselves, which is to say, not at all. What they value is honesty, accountability, and the willingness to make things right when something goes wrong. I began studying why most people find it so difficult to admit mistakes. Fear of appearing incompetent, worry about losing respect, concern about blame and consequences. All of these create powerful psychological pressure to defend and rationalize rather than acknowledge and correct. But I discovered that the opposite actually happens when you admit errors quickly and sincerely. People respect honesty more than perfection. They trust someone who acknowledges mistakes more than someone who never seems to make any. They want to work with people who take responsibility rather than those who always find excuses. The key is in how you admit mistakes. A defensive, minimizing acknowledgement, like "I guess I might have been slightly off," carries no power and little credibility, but a clear, complete admission, like "I was wrong about this, and here's what I'm going to do to fix it," demonstrates integrity and builds trust. Learn to follow a specific pattern when acknowledging errors. First, admit the mistake clearly, without hedging or qualifying. Second, take full responsibility without blaming external factors or other people. Third, express genuine regret for any problems caused. Fourth, focus immediately on solutions and prevention. One of my students, a department manager named Helen, shared a powerful example of this principle in action. She had made a scheduling error that caused her team to miss an important deadline, potentially costing the company a valuable contract. Her initial impulse was to blame the confusion on unclear instructions from her supervisor. Instead, she applied the principle I had taught her. She called a team meeting and said, "I made a serious mistake in scheduling that caused us to miss our deadline. This is entirely my responsibility, and I know it may cost us this contract. I'm sorry for letting the team down, and here's what I'm doing to ensure this never happens again." The response amazed her. Instead of losing respect from her team, she gained it. Employees who had been frustrated about the missed deadline began offering suggestions for improvement. Her supervisor, who had been preparing for a difficult conversation, instead commended her for her honesty and leadership in addressing the problem. Most remarkably, when the client learned about the situation and Helen's response, they were so impressed with her integrity that they gave the company another chance. The contract was ultimately won because of, not despite, her willingness to admit and take responsibility for the mistake. I discovered that admitting mistakes quickly serves several important functions. It prevents small errors from becoming big problems through cover-up attempts. It builds credibility that serves you well in future situations. It demonstrates the kind of integrity that makes others want to work with you. It creates an atmosphere where others feel safe admitting their own mistakes, leading to faster problem solving and continuous improvement. But perhaps most importantly, I learned that admitting when you're wrong frees you from the exhausting burden of pretending to be perfect. It allows you to focus your energy on solving problems rather than defending positions. It enables genuine learning and growth rather than defensive stagnation. The quiet leaders I studied had all embraced this principle. They understood that strength comes not from never making mistakes, but from handling mistakes with grace, honesty, and accountability. They knew that people follow leaders they trust more readily than leaders they fear. And that trust is built through transparency rather than perfection. Asterisk, asterisk, the psychology of agreement is one of the most powerful forces in human relations, yet most people approach persuasion in exactly the wrong way. They begin with points of disagreement, create resistance, and wonder why their ideas are rejected. I discovered that the secret to influence lies in creating a momentum of agreement that makes saying yes feel natural and comfortable. This revelation came to me through observing a master salesman named Eddie who consistently outsold his colleagues despite having no special charisma or superior product knowledge. Curious about his success, I asked to observe him during client meetings. What I witnessed revolutionized my understanding of persuasion. Eddie never began by presenting his product or making his sales pitch. Instead, he started every conversation by asking questions that were easy to agree with. You want the best value for your money, don't you? Quality is important to you, isn't it? You'd like to work with someone you can trust, wouldn't you? Each question received an obvious yes response. By the time Eddie presented his actual proposal, the client had already said yes to him multiple times. They had established a pattern of agreement, a sense of being on the same side, a psychological momentum that made saying yes to his final requests feel like a natural continuation of their conversation. I began experimenting with this approach in my own work. Instead of jumping directly into what I wanted people to do, I started by identifying points we could easily agree on. With resistant students, I might begin. You want to be more confident in meetings, don't you? Being able to express your ideas clearly would be valuable, wouldn't it? You'd like others to see you as a leader, wouldn't you? The results were remarkable. People who had been skeptical about my training programs became eager participants. Employees who had resisted new procedures became willing to try different approaches. Even difficult personalities became more cooperative when I took time to build agreement before introducing change. The principle works because of how our minds process consistency. Once we agree to something, we feel psychological pressure to remain consistent with that agreement. When we say yes to a series of related ideas, saying no to the final request creates mental discomfort that most people prefer to avoid. But the technique must be used with absolute integrity. The agreements you build must be genuine and relevant to your ultimate request. If you manipulate people into superficial agreements that don't actually relate to your goal, they'll feel deceived and become more resistant than before. I learned to structure important conversations using what I called the yes ladder. I would identify the core beliefs and values that my requests aligned with, then present these as questions that naturally led to agreement. Each yes became a stepping stone toward the outcome I was seeking. For example, when proposing a new training program to skeptical executives, I might ask, would you agree that your managers are your most valuable resource? Yes, and developing their skills would help them be more effective. Yes. If we could improve their leadership abilities, that would benefit the entire organization. Yes, and the investment would pay for itself through improved performance. Yes, by the time I presented the specific program details, we had already agreed on the fundamental logic of the investment. The conversation had shifted from whether to invest in management development to how best to accomplish that goal. I discovered several techniques for building this momentum of agreement, starting with obvious truths that no reasonable person would dispute, asking questions about shared values and common goals, focusing on benefits that clearly aligned with the other person's interests, presenting ideas as logical extensions of principles they had already accepted. One of my most successful applications involved helping a company president named George gain support for a controversial policy change. His employees were strongly resisting new productivity requirements that they saw as unreasonable and unfair. Instead of defending the policy or demanding compliance, George used the agreement-building approach. He called a meeting and began with questions. Do we all want this company to succeed? Yes. Would you agree that we're facing increased competition? Yes. Is it important that we remain profitable so we can continue providing good jobs? Yes. Would you want to be part of a company that couldn't compete effectively? No. Once he had established this foundation of agreement, George presented the productivity requirements not as arbitrary demands, but as necessary steps to ensure the company's success and everyone's job security. The policy that had been seen as unreasonable suddenly appeared logical and necessary. The key insight is that people don't resist ideas that they feel they've participated in developing. When you lead someone through a logical progression of agreements, they arrive at your conclusion feeling like they've reached it themselves. They become advocates for the idea rather than opponents of it. I also learned the importance of pacing these agreements properly. Moving too quickly creates suspicion. Building too many obvious agreements becomes tedious. The skill lies in finding the natural rhythm that feels like genuine conversation rather than manipulation. Perhaps most importantly, I discovered that this approach works because it's based on respect for the other person's intelligence and autonomy. Instead of trying to force acceptance of your ideas, you're helping people see how your proposal aligns with their own values and goals. You're not overriding their judgment, you're appealing to it. The quiet leaders I studied understood that lasting agreement comes from internal conviction, not external pressure. They knew that people support most enthusiastically the decisions they feel they've made themselves, and they used the psychology of agreement to help others arrive at beneficial conclusions through their own reasoning process. Few things are more important to the human spirit than dignity, yet in our eagerness to correct mistakes or assert our authority, we often strip others of this precious quality. Learning to let others save face to maintain their self-respect, even when they're wrong, became one of my most valuable tools for creating lasting influence and genuine loyalty. I learned this principle through witnessing a devastating failure of leadership that taught me as much through negative example as any positive model could have. A factory supervisor named Mr. Patterson had discovered that one of his most experienced workers had been making a significant error in a manufacturing process for several weeks, resulting in wasted materials and delayed shipments. Rather than handling the situation privately, Patterson chose to make an example of the worker. In front of the entire shift, he loudly berated the man for his incompetence, questioned how someone with his experience could make such a stupid mistake, and announced that this kind of carelessness would no longer be tolerated. The immediate result seemed successful. The error was corrected, and other workers clearly understood the importance of attention to detail. But the long-term consequences were disastrous. The humiliated worker, who had previously been one of the most dedicated and skilled employees, became sullen and uncooperative. His productivity dropped significantly. Within 2 months, he had found another job, taking 20 years of valuable experience with him. Worse still, the public humiliation created an atmosphere of fear throughout the workplace. Workers became so focused on avoiding mistakes that they stopped taking initiative or suggesting improvements. The department's overall performance actually declined despite the correction of the original error. This incident taught me that how you handle someone's mistakes is often more important than the mistakes themselves. When you destroy someone's dignity in the process of correcting their error, you may solve the immediate problem while creating much larger, long-term difficulties. I began studying leaders who were known for their ability to address problems while maintaining positive relationships with their teams. What I discovered was a completely different approach that preserved dignity while still achieving correction and improvement. These skilled leaders understood that people's sense of self-worth is fragile and precious. They recognized that public humiliation, harsh criticism, and personal attacks might produce immediate compliance, but would ultimately destroy the trust and loyalty essential for long-term success. Instead, they had learned to correct privately, praise publicly, and always provide a way for people to maintain their dignity even when admitting mistakes. They understood that face-saving isn't about avoiding accountability, it's about preserving the self-respect that enables people to learn, grow, and contribute more effectively. I developed several techniques for letting others save face, while still addressing important issues. When someone made an error, I would speak with them privately rather than in front of others. I would focus on the specific behavior or outcome rather than attacking their character or competence. I would express confidence in their ability to improve rather than questioning their overall capability. Perhaps most importantly, I learned to provide face-saving explanations that allowed people to correct their mistakes without feeling like failures. Instead of saying, "You made a serious error," I might say, "This procedure can be confusing. Let me show you a technique that might help." Instead of, "Your performance has been unacceptable," I would say, "I know you're capable of much better work than what we've been seeing lately." One of my most successful applications of this principle involved helping a company president named Robert handle a situation with his vice president, who had made a costly decision without proper authorization. The board of directors was demanding the VP's termination, and Robert was under pressure to make an example of him. But Robert understood that this vice president was generally competent and valuable to the organization. The mistake, while serious, was not characteristic of his usual judgment. Firing him would not only waste years of investment in his development, but would also create fear throughout the management team. Working together, we developed a face solution. Instead of public discipline or termination, Robert announced that he was restructuring certain decision-making processes to provide better support and oversight for complex situations. The vice president was given additional training and mentoring, presented not as punishment but as professional development. This approach allowed the VP to maintain his dignity while clearly establishing new boundaries and expectations. More importantly, it demonstrated to the entire organization that mistakes, while serious, could be learning opportunities rather than career-ending disasters. The result was improved performance not just from the vice president, but from the entire management team, who felt safer taking appropriate risks and being honest about challenges. I learned that letting others save face often requires creativity and flexibility in how you frame situations. Sometimes it means attributing mistakes to circumstances rather than character flaws. Sometimes it involves emphasizing good intentions even when outcomes were poor. Sometimes it requires finding ways for people to be part of the solution rather than just victims of correction. The key insight is that people can accept almost any criticism or correction if it's delivered in a way that preserves their fundamental sense of worth and competence. They can acknowledge mistakes if they don't feel like those mistakes define them as people. They can change behavior if they believe the change reflects growth rather than inadequacy. But this principle goes beyond just handling mistakes. It applies to any situation where you need to influence someone to change their position or approach. Instead of proving them wrong, you help them discover a better way. Instead of demanding surrender to your viewpoint, you create space for them to adopt new perspectives while maintaining their dignity. The quiet leaders I studied had mastered this delicate art. They understood that lasting influence comes from helping people feel good about changing rather than bad about their previous choices. They knew that when you let others save face, you don't just solve immediate problems, you build the trust and respect that enables ongoing collaboration and continuous improvement. In all my years of studying human motivation, I discovered that genuine appreciation is the most underutilized yet powerful tool for inspiring exceptional performance. Most leaders focus on correcting what's wrong while ignoring what's right, not realizing they're starving their people of the recognition that could transform ordinary effort into extraordinary achievement. This revelation came through observing the dramatic transformation of what had been considered a problem employee. Mary worked in the accounting department of a company where I was consulting, and she had developed a reputation for being difficult, uncooperative, and barely meeting minimum standards. Her supervisor had tried everything: warnings, training, closer supervision, with little improvement. During my time with the company, I noticed something others had missed. While Mary's attitude was indeed problematic, her actual work was incredibly accurate. In 6 months of reviewing financial documents, she had made fewer errors than anyone else in the department. Her attention to detail was exceptional. Even if her interpersonal skills were lacking, I suggested to her supervisor that we try a different approach. Instead of focusing on Mary's attitude problems, what if we acknowledged her strength in accuracy and precision? The supervisor was skeptical but agreed to try. The next time, Mary completed a particularly complex reconciliation without errors. Her supervisor stopped by her desk and said, "Mary, I want you to know that your accuracy on this project probably saved us from a significant problem with the audit. The level of detail and precision in your work is really valuable to this team." The change wasn't immediate, but it was noticeable. Mary seemed surprised by the recognition, then gradually began taking more pride in her work. She started offering to help with complex problems. Her interactions with colleagues became more positive. Within 3 months, she had transformed from a liability into one of the department's most valuable contributors. This experience taught me that most performance problems aren't really ability problems, they're motivation problems. And motivation flourishes under appreciation while withering under criticism. When people feel valued for what they do well, they naturally want to do more of it. But I learned that not all appreciation is equally effective. Generic praise like "good job" or "nice work" has little impact because it feels routine and insincere. Specific appreciation that acknowledges particular contributions and explains why they matter creates much more powerful motivation. I developed what I called the meaningful appreciation formula. First, identify specific behaviors or results that deserve recognition. Second, acknowledge the effort or skill involved. Third, explain the positive impact or value created. Fourth, express genuine gratitude for the contribution. For example, instead of saying "thanks for the report," I would say "thank you for the thorough analysis in your market research report. The way you identified emerging trends and their potential impact gives us exactly the information we need to make strategic decisions. I really appreciate the time and thought you put into this." This approach transforms appreciation from empty flattery into meaningful recognition that reinforces positive behavior and motivates continued excellence. I began studying organizations known for exceptional employee engagement and performance. What I found was consistent. The most effective leaders were also the most generous with genuine appreciation. They had made recognition a regular part of their leadership practice, not something reserved for special occasions or annual reviews. One company president named Arthur shared his approach with me. Every week, he would identify at least 3 specific contributions worth acknowledging, sometimes major achievements, sometimes small acts of excellence that might otherwise go unnoticed. He would deliver this appreciation personally, specifically, and publicly when appropriate. Arthur told me, I used to think my job was to catch people doing things wrong and correct them. Now I realize it's to catch people doing things right and encourage more of it. The results speak for themselves. Our productivity is up, turnover is down, and people actually enjoy coming to work. I learned that appreciation works because it fulfills fundamental human needs. People want to feel valuable, to know that their efforts matter, to believe that their contributions are recognized and appreciated. When these needs are met, extraordinary motivation follows naturally, but appreciation must be authentic to be effective. People can sense when recognition is manipulative or insincere. They know the difference between genuine gratitude and calculated flattery. The appreciation that transforms performance comes from leaders who truly value their people and express that value consistently and specifically. I also discovered that appreciation is most powerful when it focuses on effort and process, not just results. Recognizing someone for their persistence through challenges, their creative problem-solving approach, or their willingness to help others builds character and reinforces behaviors that lead to long-term success. One of my students, a team leader named Patricia, revolutionized her department's performance by implementing what she called appreciation rounds. Every team meeting began with members acknowledging specific contributions from their colleagues. The practice initially felt awkward, but within weeks it had created an atmosphere of mutual support and recognition that dramatically improved both morale and results. The key insight is that appreciation doesn't cost anything except attention and intention, yet it pays dividends in loyalty, motivation, and performance that far exceed any monetary investment. When people feel genuinely valued, they become emotionally invested in success. They go beyond minimum requirements because they want to contribute to something they feel proud to be part of. I learned to make appreciation a discipline, not just an impulse. I would actively look for things to acknowledge, keeping notes about contributions worth recognizing. I would vary my methods, sometimes written notes, sometimes public recognition, sometimes private conversations, to ensure the appreciation felt fresh and meaningful. Perhaps most importantly, I discovered that leaders who master appreciation don't just improve their team's performance, they improve their own experience of leadership. When you focus on what people do well, rather than what they do wrong, you start seeing the best in others, rather than the worst. You become the kind of leader people want to follow, rather than the kind they have to follow. The quiet leaders I studied understood that appreciation is not weakness or soft leadership. It's smart leadership that unlocks human potential by fulfilling the deep need for recognition and value that drives all exceptional performance. ***, one of the most profound discoveries in my study of human motivation was this: people will move heaven and earth to live up to the reputation you give them. When you see potential in others and express confidence in their ability to achieve greatness, you create a powerful force that often transforms that potential into reality. I learned this principle through a situation that seemed hopeless at first. A young man named Tommy had been referred to one of my public speaking classes by his employer, who described him as lacking confidence and leadership potential. Tommy was painfully shy, rarely spoke in meetings, and seemed convinced that he had nothing valuable to contribute. My initial interactions with Tommy confirmed his employer's assessment. He sat in the back of the classroom, avoided eye contact, and when forced to participate, spoke so quietly that others had to strain to hear him. Most instructors would have written him off as someone who simply wasn't cut out for leadership roles. But something in Tommy's careful attention to others' presentations and his thoughtful written exercises suggested hidden potential. Instead of accepting the limitations that everyone else saw, I decided to try a different approach. I began treating Tommy not as he was, but as I believed he could become. After one of his brief, hesitant presentations, I pulled him aside and said, "Tommy, I can see that you have natural leadership qualities that you haven't fully developed. Yet, your ability to analyze complex situations and your genuine concern for others are exactly what great leaders are made of. I believe you have the potential to become an exceptional speaker and influential leader." Tommy looked at me as if I were talking about someone else entirely. But over the following weeks, something remarkable began to happen. He started sitting a little straighter during class. He began volunteering for speaking opportunities. His voice grew stronger and more confident. Most importantly, he started believing in the potential that I had seen in him. By the end of the course, Tommy was leading group discussions and delivering presentations with confidence and skill that amazed everyone, including himself. His employer was so impressed with the transformation that Tommy was promoted to a management position within 6 months. Years later, Tommy wrote to tell me that my belief in his potential had changed the entire trajectory of his life. He had become a successful executive, but more importantly, he had discovered confidence and capabilities he never knew he possessed. This experience taught me about the incredible power of expectations. When you sincerely believe in someone's potential and express that belief consistently, you give them a reputation to live up to. Most people will work extraordinarily hard to prove worthy of the confidence you've placed in them. But this principle only works when your belief is genuine and your expectations are realistic. People can sense when you're offering empty encouragement or setting them up for failure with unrealistic demands. The reputation you give them must be based on real observation of their strengths and legitimate assessment of their potential. I began studying this phenomenon more systematically and discovered that it was being used effectively by leaders in every field. Great coaches saw championship potential in average athletes. Inspiring teachers found genius in struggling students. Exceptional managers discovered leadership capabilities in unlikely employees. What these leaders understood was that most people operate far below their actual potential because they've accepted limiting beliefs about their capabilities. When someone they respect sees greater possibilities and expresses confidence in their ability to achieve them, it often unlocks dormant potential that surprises everyone. I developed several techniques for giving others fine reputations to live up to. I learned to identify genuine strengths that people might not recognize in themselves. I would point out positive qualities they demonstrated without realizing it. I would express confidence in their ability to develop skills they thought were beyond their reach. For example, instead of saying you need to be more assertive, I might say, "I've noticed that when you do speak up, your insights are particularly valuable. You have a natural ability to see solutions that others miss. I think you could become known as someone whose opinion is sought because of your unique perspective." This approach transforms what could be criticism into encouragement. It acknowledges current reality while painting a vision of future possibility. It gives people a positive identity to grow into rather than a negative one to escape from. One of my most successful applications involved helping a department manager named Ruth develop her leadership team. Several of her supervisors were struggling with confidence and effectiveness, and traditional training approaches weren't producing the desired results. Ruth began using what we called reputation building in her individual meetings with team members. Instead of focusing on their current limitations, she would identify emerging strengths and express confidence in their development. She would say things like, "I can see you developing into someone others will look to for guidance on quality." issues, or you're becoming the kind of leader who brings out the best in your team. The transformation was remarkable. Supervisors who had been hesitant and reactive became proactive and confident. They began taking initiative, offering suggestions, and stepping up to challenges they previously would have avoided. The department's overall performance improved dramatically as team members grew into the positive reputations Ruth had given them. I learned that this principle works because it taps into people's deepest desire to be their best selves. When someone they respect sees greatness in them, it becomes a beacon that guides their behavior and decision-making. They start asking themselves, what would someone with this reputation do in this situation? The key is to make your confidence specific and actionable. Instead of generic encouragement, like you can do anything, focus on particular strengths and specific areas for development. Help people see exactly what excellence looks like in their situation and express genuine belief in their ability to achieve it. Perhaps most importantly, I discovered that when you give others fine reputations to live up to, you're not just helping them, you're developing your own ability to see the best in people. You become the kind of leader who brings out greatness in others because you expect to find it. The quiet leaders I studied had all mastered this art of seeing and cultivating potential. They understood that leadership isn't just about managing current performance, it's about inspiring future possibilities and giving people the confidence to reach them. Asterisk. The ultimate test of leadership influence is not whether people will do what you ask, but whether they want to do it. The difference between compliance and enthusiasm is the difference between managing and leading, between getting by and achieving greatness. Learning to make others genuinely glad to contribute to your goals became the pinnacle of my understanding of human relations. This profound insight came through observing two managers with completely different approaches to a similar challenge. Both needed their teams to work overtime during a crucial project deadline, but their methods and results couldn't have been more different. The first manager, Mr. Collins, called a meeting and announced, "We're behind schedule and need everyone to work evenings and weekends until this project is complete. I know it's not ideal, but it's necessary for the company's success." His team complied because they had to, but the atmosphere was resentful and tense. People did the minimum required, watched the clock, and complained constantly about the extra burden. The second manager, Mrs. Henderson, approached the same situation completely differently. She began by acknowledging the challenge and then said, "I know this timing isn't perfect for anyone, but I believe this project could be the breakthrough that establishes our team as the go-to group for major initiatives. If we can deliver exceptional results under pressure, it will demonstrate capabilities that could lead to better projects, more resources, and advancement opportunities for everyone involved." She then asked each team member how the overtime would affect their personal schedules and worked to accommodate their individual needs wherever possible. She arranged for meals to be provided, made sure people could adjust their hours when needed for family obligations, and created a system for recognizing each person's contribution to the project's success. The difference in results was extraordinary. Mrs. Henderson's team not only worked the extra hours willingly, but brought energy and creativity to the project that exceeded everyone's expectations. They collaborated more effectively, solved problems more innovatively, and delivered results that impressed senior management and led to exactly the kinds of opportunities Henderson had described. This comparison taught me that the secret to making others glad to do what you want lies in connecting your requests to their own motivations, values, and aspirations. When people understand how helping you achieve your goals also helps them achieve theirs, cooperation becomes enthusiastic rather than reluctant. I began studying what truly motivates people beyond basic compensation and job security. What I discovered was that most people are driven by deeper psychological needs. the desire to contribute to something meaningful, the need to feel valued and appreciated, the aspiration to grow and develop their capabilities, the wish to be part of successful endeavors that they can take pride in. The leaders who mastered the art of making others glad to cooperate had learned to frame their requests in terms of these deeper motivations. Instead of simply asking people to do things, they helped people see how doing those things would benefit them personally and professionally. I developed what I called the motivation alignment method. Before making any significant request, I would ask myself, what does this person really want? How can accomplishing my goal help them accomplish theirs? What benefits beyond the immediate task can I offer? How can I present this opportunity in a way that makes them genuinely excited to participate? For example, when I needed a volunteer to help with a particularly challenging training program, instead of simply asking someone to take on extra work, I might say, I have an opportunity that I think could be perfect for someone who wants to develop their facilitation skills and gain experience working with senior executives. The project would involve some additional time, but it would give you direct exposure to leadership challenges and problem solving at the highest level. Would you be interested in learning more about it? This approach transforms requests from burdens into opportunities. It helps people see how saying yes to you is really saying yes to their own development and advancement. One of my most successful applications involved helping a company president named Charles gain support for a major organizational restructuring that employees were resisting. Instead of mandating the changes or trying to convince people they were necessary, Charles focused on helping each person understand how the restructuring could benefit them personally. To the sales team, he emphasized how the new structure would give them better support and resources to succeed. To the operations staff, he highlighted how streamlined processes would reduce frustration and make their work more efficient. To the management team, he showed how clearer roles and responsibilities would enhance their ability to lead effectively. Most importantly, Charles involved people in shaping the implementation of changes that affected them. Instead of imposing solutions, he asked for input on how to make the transitions work best for everyone involved. This transformed employees from passive recipients of change into active participants in creating improvements. The restructuring that had initially faced strong resistance became supported enthusiastically because people could see how it served their own interests as well as the company's goals. I learned that making others glad to cooperate requires genuine concern for their welfare and success. You can't fake this motivation people sense when you're trying to manipulate them for purely selfish purposes. But when your requests genuinely offer mutual benefit, and when you take time to understand and address others' needs, cooperation becomes natural and enthusiastic. The key insight is that most people want to contribute to success and be part of winning teams. They want to feel that their efforts matter and that their contributions are valued. When you can show them how helping you achieve your goals also helps them achieve theirs, you tap into powerful sources of motivation that go far beyond external pressure or obligation. I also discovered that this principle works best when you give people autonomy in how they accomplish shared objectives. Instead of micromanaging every detail, explain the desired outcome and ask for their ideas about the best way to achieve it. Most people will work much harder for plans they help create than for plans imposed on them. Perhaps most importantly, I learned that when you make others glad to do what you want, you're not just accomplishing immediate objectives, you're building relationships and developing people in ways that create long-term loyalty and commitment. People remember leaders who helped them grow and succeed, and they become eager to work with such leaders again in the future. The quiet leaders I studied had all mastered this art of aligning their goals with others' aspirations. They understood that sustainable influence comes not from power over people, but from power with people, the kind of collaborative relationship where everyone wins by working together toward shared success. After decades of studying and teaching human relations, I realized that knowing these principles intellectually is vastly different from applying them consistently in daily life. The transformation from ordinary manager to quiet leader requires developing a systematic approach that makes these behaviors natural and automatic, rather than forced and artificial. The challenge I observed in my students was not understanding the principles. Most people quickly grasped the logic and value of genuine interest, active listening, appreciation, and respect. The challenge was implementing these principles consistently under pressure, in difficult situations, and with challenging personalities. I remember working with an executive named David, who attended one of my courses with great enthusiasm. He understood every concept, participated actively in discussions, and seemed completely committed to transforming his leadership approach. But 6 months later, he returned frustrated and discouraged. "Dale," he said, "everything you taught makes perfect sense, and when I remember to use these techniques, they work beautifully. But in the heat of daily pressures, dealing with deadlines, conflicts, and difficult people, I fall back into my old patterns of criticism, impatience, and authoritarianism. How do I make these principles stick when I need them most?" David's challenge helped me realize that effective human relations skills require more than knowledge. They require the development of new habits and instincts that operate even under stress. I began developing what I called the quiet leadership system, practical framework for integrating these principles into daily practice. The foundation of this system is what I termed relationship intentions. Before every significant interaction, I trained myself to pause and ask 3 questions. What does this person need from this conversation? How can I show genuine respect and interest? What outcome would serve both of us best? This brief pause, sometimes just a few seconds, shifts your focus from what you want to get from the interaction to what you can give to it. It activates your natural empathy and reminds you to approach the conversation as a human being connecting with another human being, not as a role interacting with a function. I developed daily practices that reinforced these principles. Each morning, I would identify at least one person whose contributions I could acknowledge that day. During meetings, I would focus on asking at least one question that showed genuine interest in others' perspectives. In difficult conversations, I would remind myself to find something I could genuinely agree with before introducing any disagreement. These practices began as conscious disciplines, but gradually became natural reflexes. The more I applied them, the more automatic they became. What had initially required constant mental effort eventually became my normal way of interacting with people. I also learned the importance of what I called recovery protocols for when I inevitably fell short of these ideals. Instead of abandoning the principles after making mistakes, I developed ways to correct course quickly. If I caught myself being overly critical, I would immediately look for something to appreciate. If I realized I had dominated a conversation, I would ask a question that invited others to share their thoughts. One of my most valuable discoveries was the power of preparation for challenging relationships. Before meeting with difficult people, I would spend a few minutes reflecting on their positive qualities, their pressures and challenges, and what they might need from our interaction. This preparation helped me approach them with empathy rather than defensiveness. I worked with David to develop his personal version of this system. We identified his biggest relationship challenges and created specific strategies for each one. For his tendency to interrupt in meetings, we developed a listening discipline where he would take notes on others' contributions before responding. For his impatience with slower colleagues, we practiced finding and acknowledging their unique strengths. Most importantly, we established what he called relationship check-ins, brief weekly reviews, where David would assess how well he had applied human relations principles, and identify areas for improvement. This created accountability and continuous learning that accelerated his development. The results were dramatic. Within 3 months, David's team relationships had transformed. Employee engagement scores in his department rose significantly. People began seeking him out for advice and collaboration. His boss noted improved morale and productivity in his area. But perhaps most importantly, David reported that work had become more enjoyable and fulfilling. "I used to dread difficult conversations and challenging people," he told me. "Now I see them as opportunities to practice these skills and build stronger relationships. Leadership feels less like a battle and more like a collaboration." I learned that building a quiet leadership system requires patience and persistence. These principles go against many of the competitive, aggressive instincts that our culture often rewards. It takes time to develop the confidence that showing genuine interest in others will serve your own interests better than self-promotion. The key insight is that quiet leadership is not about being passive or weak. It's about being strategically focused on long-term relationship building rather than short-term dominance. It's about understanding that sustainable influence comes from trust and respect rather than fear and authority. I developed several tools to support this systematic approach. Written reminders of key principles posted where they would be seen regularly. Specific phrases and questions practiced until they became natural. Regular reflection on relationship, successes and failures to identify patterns and opportunities for improvement. Perhaps most importantly, I learned to measure success differently. Instead of focusing only on immediate outcomes, whether I got what I wanted from each interaction, I began tracking relationship quality over time. Were people more open with me? Did they seek my input on important decisions? Were they enthusiastic about collaborating on projects? These relationship metrics often proved more valuable than short-term wins because they created the foundation for ongoing influence and cooperation that served all my goals more effectively than any single successful negotiation or confrontation. The quiet leaders I studied had all developed their own versions of this systematic approach. They understood that excellence in human relations, like excellence in any skill, requires deliberate practice, continuous refinement, and commitment to improvement even when progress seems slow. Building your quiet leadership system is not about perfection, it's about progress. Every genuine connection you make, every person you help feel valued, every conflict you resolve through understanding rather than force, strengthens your influence and effectiveness as a leader. The compound effect of these small, consistent improvements creates the kind of leadership presence that people naturally want to follow. Asterisk, as I reflect on a lifetime dedicated to understanding and teaching human relations, I am struck by a profound truth. The quiet leaders who master these principles don't just change their own lives. They create ripples of positive influence that extend far beyond what they can see or measure. Every person you inspire, every relationship you improve, every individual you help feel valued, becomes a source of similar influence in their own circles. I have received thousands of letters over the years from people who attended my courses or read my books. And what moves me most are not the stories of career advancement or business success, though those are gratifying, but the accounts of how these principles transformed their relationships with spouses, children, friends, and colleagues. They learned to be better leaders by first learning to be better human beings. One letter that particularly touched me came from a man named William who had attended my course 20 years earlier. He wrote not about his own achievements, but about his son, who had just been promoted to department manager at a young age. "Dale," he wrote, "my son has become the kind of leader people want to follow, and I know it's because he learned from watching how I applied your principles at home. The respect and genuine interest you taught me to show others became the model for how our family treats each other and how my son now treats his team. This is the true power of quiet leadership. Multiplies itself. When you demonstrate genuine respect for others, you don't just improve that relationship. You show everyone around you a better way of treating people. When you listen deeply and make others feel valued, you don't just solve immediate problems. You create a standard of interaction that others begin to emulate. Throughout my career, I have observed that the most effective leaders are those who understand that their greatest legacy will not be what they accomplished, but whom they influenced and how those people went on to influence others. They see leadership not as a title or position, but as a responsibility to bring out the best in every person they encounter. This perspective changes everything about how you approach daily interactions. Every conversation becomes an opportunity to practice these principles. Every relationship becomes a chance to demonstrate the power of genuine human connection. Every challenge becomes a laboratory for testing whether you can maintain your commitment to respect and understanding even under pressure. I think of the thousands of my students who have gone on to become teachers, managers, parents, and community leaders, carrying these principles into countless situations I will never know about. I imagine the meetings that became more collaborative because someone remembered to ask for others' opinions. I picture the conflicts that were resolved through understanding rather than force because someone chose to listen before speaking. I envision the careers that flourished because someone felt genuinely valued and appreciated. But perhaps most importantly, I think about the individual moments of human connection, the shy employee who found confidence because someone believed in their potential, the difficult colleague who became cooperative because someone took time to understand their perspective, the struggling team member who improved because someone focused on their strengths rather than their weaknesses. These moments may seem small compared to major business achievements or historical events, but they represent the real work of leadership, patient, persistent effort to help others become their best selves. This is how the world actually changes, not through dramatic proclamations or forceful commands, but through millions of individual relationships built on respect, understanding, and genuine care. The principles I have shared with you are not merely techniques for getting what you want from others. They are a philosophy of human interaction based on the profound truth that every person you meet is fighting battles you know nothing about, carrying dreams they may never share, and possessing potential they may not even recognize themselves. When you approach others with this understanding, when you show genuine interest in their thoughts and feelings, when you listen with your whole attention, when you acknowledge their contributions and believe in their possibilities, you give them something precious and rare, the experience of being truly seen and valued. This is not soft leadership or passive management. This is the most powerful form of influence available to human beings, the ability to inspire others, to want to give their best efforts because they know you care about their success as much as your own. As you begin to apply these principles in your own life and leadership, remember that mastery comes through practice, not perfection. Every day will bring opportunities to choose between the easy path of authority and the harder but more rewarding path of influence. Every difficult person will test your commitment to finding their value. Every frustrating situation will challenge your patience and empathy, but with each choice to respect rather than dismiss, to understand rather than judge, to appreciate rather than criticize, you build not only your own capacity for leadership, but also contribute to a world where human beings treat each other with greater dignity and care. This is your opportunity to join the ranks of quiet leaders who change the world not through force or position, but through the simple yet profound act of helping others feel important, valued, and capable of achieving more than they ever thought possible. The principles are in your hands now. The relationships are waiting. The opportunities for influence surround you every day. Your legacy of quiet leadership begins with your very next interaction. Make it count.